A Navy SEAL walks into a base exchange in 1968. He buys Levis's 501 jeans, legs pantyhose, and heads to the counter. The clerk stares at him. He says nothing. He doesn't need to say anything. He's getting ready to walk into the Rung Special Zone, one of the most dangerous pieces of territory on Earth. And everything he just bought is going to help him live in ways that official United States military gear simply will not. Today, we're going inside the unofficial Quartermaster's Guide of Vietnam, the gear that soldiers, SEALs, and special operators begged, borrowed, and improvised out of official channels because official channels were going to get them killed. Pantyhose and blue jeans, maxi pads, the birth of going commando, enemy uniforms worn by American pointmen. All of these are not jokes or eccentricities. These are solutions, often brilliant solutions, to problems that the official United States military equipment development process either could not or would not solve. The environment that produced all of this was the Myeong Delta and the Rungsat Special Zone, specifically a 400 square kilometer maze of tidal rivers, mangrove swamps, and mud flats southeast of Saigon that SEAL Platoon was expected to operate in from the mid-1960s onward. Official military doctrine, official military equipment, and official military thinking had been developed on models of European and Korean War territories. The Myeong Delta was not that. The Myeong Delta was a place that devoured conventional gear, conventional tactics, and conventionally thinking soldiers alive. The SEALs who found a way to survive in it did so by discarding almost all conventional military assumptions that they had brought with them to the fight. Let's start with the pants. Navy SEALs, who had to operate in the Myeong Delta in 1967 and 1968, found a problem with the official jungle fatigues that nobody had spotted in the equipment development process. Cargo pockets. The jungle fatigues featured large bellowed cargo pockets on both thighs, useful in most combat environments for carrying additional ammunition, maps, and gear. In the Myeong Delta's tidal swamps and canal networks, those pockets became anchors. Every time the operator crossed a waterway or moved through the flooded terrain, which happens constantly, the pockets would fill with water and the Myeong Delta's heavy mud. That mud wouldn't drain. It would sit there, weighing down each leg, slowing the operator at the moments when speed is absolutely crucial. In an ambush situation, the 1-second lag in movement caused by wet leg pockets had deadly implications. The solution, spread in SEAL Platoon through word of mouth rather than official channels, was the Levi's 501 and 505 denim jeans, specifically those models. The geometry mattered. Levi's fit close to the body with small, flat cargo pockets that don't balloon open when submerged in the water. When the operator climbs out of the canal wearing Levi's, the water sheets off immediately. The pockets didn't hold mud. The denim itself, strong and tightly woven fabric, dries faster in the Myeong Delta climate than the jungle fatigue fabric. Bonus feature: the heavy denim survives elephant grass, the razor-sharp vegetation common throughout the Delta, and destroys the official uniforms like paper. The SEALs started purchasing their own jeans and mailing the requests for specific models home. Former SEAL Roger Hayden described the resulting uniform set in a way that captures both its practical and its prestige features. Operators in coral combat boots, Levi's, and Rolex watches. You can spot a SEAL on sight, he wrote. Civilian gear had become the Special Forces uniform. The pantyhose solved a different problem in the same environment. The tidal swamps of the Rungsat and the Myeong Delta were overrun with leeches. Not the little incidental leeches of temperate rivers, but the aggressive tropical leeches that moved toward warm bodies, crawled up the pant legs, through the fabric weave of the standard issue uniform, and bit in locations that required an intimate knowledge of your own body incompatible with tactical movement. The standard issued jungle fatigue was loose enough in weave that the leeches would bite through it or find gaps at the cuffs and the waistband. A SEAL, finishing an insertion through the swamp waters, would emerge with dozens of leeches biting into him before he takes his first step on dry land. The nylon mesh of the women's pantyhoses prevented this through materials science. The nylon weave was too tight for the leeches to bite through. The nylon fabric was too slick for them to get a foothold on. And crucially, the pantyhoses are woven to fit tightly to the legs with no gaps at the waist at all, unlike standard pants. The combination of the close-fitting Levi's over the nylon pantyhose created a leech-resistant barrier that the Myeong Delta population couldn't penetrate. The operators wearing it were moving through the same swamps that made the standard issue gear into a medical maintenance problem and emerging largely clean from them. The image of a special forces outfit in women's pantyhoses and blue jeans is funny until you understand the specific logic behind it. Then it's simply practical. The Rolex watch deserves its own mentioning, not because it was improvised, but because of what it represented in the same ecosystem of field-expedient thinking. The official military-issue watches of Vietnam era were inadequate for the tasks that SEALs and SOG teams were expected to run. Timing was crucial for the coordination of fire support, exfiltration windows, and insertion sequences in the operations that had lethal consequences if the timing was off by 30 seconds. Operators began purchasing Rolex Submariner and Sea Dweller models personally, watches that were waterproof to much greater depths than anything the Delta or the Jungle could throw at them, mechanically reliable without batteries, and readable in low light. The Rolex had become associated with the SEAL and SOG culture not as a luxury item, but as professional equipment superior to the military-issue gear. The same logic that drove the Levi's decision drove the Rolex decision. If the official equipment fails the environment, you purchase the gear that works. The regular infantry had their own innovations driven by the same environmental realities, and the most significant of these centered on the problem that had disabled many American soldiers in a way that most people don't realize. The official military-issue combat boot for Vietnam was leather and canvas, and the standard military-issue sock was cotton. Cotton is a moisture sponge. It soaks water up and keeps it against skin. In a dry environment, that's just a slight inefficiency. In the Myeong Delta, where soldiers spend prolonged time with their feet submerged in water or in direct contact with it, the cotton sock creates a problem known as immersion foot, the same trench foot that plagued the WWI soldiers in flooded trenches. The response from the troops in the field skipped official channels entirely. Soldiers stopped asking their families to send them food and began sending requests for socks, specifically wool-cushioned sole socks or 100% nylon socks, neither of which the military was providing in adequate quantities. Wool wicks moisture away from skin and retains insulation even when wet. Nylon drains and dries rapidly. Both were a huge improvement over the cotton in the field conditions. The sanitary napkin is where this story takes a turn that surprises most people who encounter it for the first time. Among the most common requests sent from American infantrymen to their moms and girlfriends back home for the care packages was the box of maxi pads. Not for medical emergencies, even though they saw some of those, but for two entirely practical field modifications that nobody in the Army equipment development chain had thought of. First, it was insoles. A sanitary napkin inserted into a jungle boot provides cushioning and, crucially, absorption. The pad absorbed the sweat and the water that inevitably enters the boot while moving through the wet terrain, keeping the foot drier than the bare boot would. It could be swapped out and dried, or simply replaced from the supply that the soldier was carrying. The military's official jungle boot insole was not equipped to do this. The maxi pad was. Second application was the rucksack shoulder straps. An infantryman with 60 to 80 pounds of gear on him had that weight concentrated on 2 strips of canvas webbing that crossed his shoulders. After several hours of marching, those straps cut into the trapezius muscle and collarbone with sufficient force to create pressure injuries that disabled the soldier's ability to carry the pack at all. The adhesive backing of the sanitary pad could be stuck directly underneath the strap, creating a cushion that distributes pressure over a wider surface area and reduces the friction against skin. This was improvised padding engineering, using the most convenient, adhesive-backed foam material available in Vietnam, which happened to be something designed for an entirely different purpose. The phrase "going commando," meaning the decision to wear no underwear, appeared in the American slang during and immediately after the Vietnam War, and its origins are exactly what the name suggests. The standard military-issue cotton underwear, in the sustained heat and humidity, becomes a bacterial incubation chamber. The fabric stays wet, traps the heat, creates friction during the movement, and causes the fungal infection and chafing at a rate that appears in medical records as an operational problem. The solution for many infantrymen was simply to stop wearing it. No underwear means no moisture buildup, no friction point, no bacterial growth in the fabric that never dries. For those who want a protective layer, the request goes home. Send the women's silk or nylon underwear or silk boxer shorts. The same logic applies here as to the parachute silk that Viet Cong cut into undergarments. The nylon and the silk don't hold moisture, dry almost immediately, and produce minimum friction against skin during the sustained movement. The women's underwear request creates exactly the kind of awkward conversation that veterans have been diplomatically negotiating in their families' stories ever since. The operational logic is completely sound. The condom on the rifle muzzle is perhaps the best known of these field modifications, and requires understanding the M16's peculiarities to appreciate why it was so widely adopted. The M16 that the American troops brought to Vietnam in 1965 and 1966 had several reliability issues that were only fixed in 1967 and beyond in the M16A1 variant. One of the most important was its sensitivity to fouling and obstructions. The gas-operated mechanism that made the M16 light and accurate was poorly tolerant of the mud, water, and debris that were inevitable in the Delta operations. If the muzzle went underwater, if the mud entered the barrel during the low crawl, if the soldier fell into the canal with his rifle, the weapon could jam or, in the worst cases, catastrophically rupture when fired. Infantry weapon that cannot be trusted to fire when needed is not an infantry weapon. Troops started requesting unlubricated condoms from the care packages and commissary supplies. Stretched over the muzzle, the condom sealed the barrel completely against the water and debris during the river crossings, low crawls through the mud, and canal infiltrations. The operator could pull the trigger without removing the condom, and the weapon would work just fine. The barrel stayed clean during the movement phase. The round went through the rubber during the engagement phase. The solution was as simple as it was effective. MACVSOG operators took the field modification to the point that was far beyond the equipment and went into the identity itself. Point men on SOG reconnaissance teams, the leading elements of the patrol moving through the unscouted jungle, carried the asymmetric burden. They would be the first to make contact with any enemy force the patrol might encounter. In the dense, triple canopy jungle of the Central Highlands and border regions where SOG teams operated, this contact would mean the sudden collision at the extremely close range, 10 meters, sometimes less. At that range, the fraction of a second between visual recognition and the trigger pull would mean the entire difference between survival and death. SOG point men began wearing the captured enemy clothing and carrying the captured enemy weapons, not for the purposes of disguise during infiltration. This was a tactical shock weapon for the moment of contact. A point man wearing black pajamas or the NVA fatigues and carrying the AK-47 rather than the M16 presented the silhouette that the enemy patrol would recognize as friendly for approximately 1 second longer than the American uniformed soldier carrying the M16 would have. 1 second in the sudden jungle contact at close range. 1 second is the difference between who fires first. The distinct sound of the AK-47 reinforced the effect. The M16 has a characteristic crack from the high-velocity 5.56 millimeter round. The AK-47 has the different acoustic signature from the 7.62 millimeter cartridge, slower, heavier, instantly recognizable to any experienced NVA or VC fighter. The enemy patrol, recognizing AK fire from the familiar silhouette, hesitated a fraction of a second longer than it would have recognizing M16 fire from the American silhouette. The SOG veterans interviewed by John Plaster in his book SOG, The Secret Wars of America's Commandos in Vietnam, described this combination of enemy clothing and enemy weapons as a standard tactic employed by the point men. Plaster's account, based on the extensive interviews with the SOG operators, is the main documented source for the systematic adoption of this approach. What connects all these modifications, the pantyhoses, the jeans, the maxi pads, the condom on the rifle muzzles, the enemy uniforms, the civilian watches, is a consistent process of environmental problem solving that the military's official procurement and equipment development process was too slow and too rigid to execute. The Army tested the equipment in controlled conditions and issued it according to the institutional timeline. The men in the Delta encountered the conditions that tests didn't cover and died on timelines that did not wait for procurement cycles. So, they solved the problems themselves, using whatever gear was available to them, and passed their solutions through informal networks that worked faster than any official channels. The genius of it was almost purely practical. Nobody in a SEAL platoon in the Rungsat Special Zone was thinking about innovation or ingenuity as concepts. They were thinking about staying alive in an environment actively trying to kill them. The pantyhose kept the leeches off. The Levi's drained instead of filling with mud. The maxi pad kept the foot dry enough to continue marching. The condom kept the rifle barrel clean enough to fire when it was the right moment. The enemy uniform bought 1 second. 1 second was enough. If you served in Vietnam and used any of these modifications or developed your own that never made it into the history books, that belongs in the record. Leave it in the comments. The official equipment history is documented, the unofficial one lives in the veteran memory, and it deserves to be preserved with equal care. For everybody else watching, the next time you hear about military technology, think of it in the context of the Navy SEAL in the Mekong Delta pulling on pantyhoses before a night patrol and solving with a dollar value of nylon what millions in equipment procurement could not. Ingenuity in war is not always spectacular. Sometimes it fits in the care package from home. Share this video because this history is too weird and too human to remain buried. Sources are in the description. Subscribe for more of what they didn't put in the textbooks. Thank you for watching. To the men who figured it out in the field, one improvised solution at a time, this one is for you.